Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm really joined by an all-star cast today to discuss this topic. So very excited to. I think it's also interesting too, for a change. I'll be interviewing the journalists, which I guess is a different sort of perspective on sort of things. Just before we get started, just for your awareness, this webinar is being recorded by Crystal Intelligence, and the recording will be shared with the registered attendees after the event. Any unauthorized recordings, including via AI tools, is not permitted. That's out of the way. Let's get started. So I'm joined here today by our colleagues Spencer, Sheila, and Emma. I don't know, guys, if you want to spend a couple of seconds to introduce yourselves. I don't know, Sheila, if you'd like to go first.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Sheila Wang. I'm an investigative reporter at the Toronto Star here in Canada. And Emma and I have been working on crypto investigations at the Toronto Star for a while.
Fantastic. Spencer, if you'd like to go next.
Yeah, my name is Spencer Woodman. I'm a reporter at the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. We're a nonprofit newsroom based in Washington, D.C., and we're also a hub of newsrooms for collaborative journalism. So last year we did the coin laundry project with Sheila and Emma at the Toronto Star that looked at illicit finance in cryptocurrency.
And Sheila, if you Emma, sorry, if you'd like to go next.
It's okay. People mistake Sheila and I all the time. I'm Emma McIntosh. I'm an investigative reporter with the Toronto Star. Sheila and I have been working together on follow the money type investigations for many years now. So, yeah, excited to talk about this one.
Fantastic. And it's really great to have you all join us today. As I said before, it's kind of a roles reversal. Very much, I'm sure you guys are used to being the interviewers rather than interviewees. And I just want to start, before we get started, I'll just set a bit of context to this as well. So from last year, we've been looking, well, for quite a while, in fact, we've been looking at cash for crypto services. And from Hong Kong to Vancouver, London to Beirut, cash to crypto services have run in the background, quietly unnoticed, processing millions, if not billions of dollars in transactions. And whilst they might serve legitimate customers, they also can act as a bridge between dirty money from crypto or cash. And since the release of the reports from Spencer, Emma, and Sheila last year, we have started to see some action against this from different regulatory authorities. We'll talk about in a second. So just quickly what cash desks are, if you aren't familiar, but I'm sure you are, that's why you're here. A cash desk is a cash for crypto service where an individual can bring in cash and receive cryptocurrency in person or via a courier of some description. And they are a global phenomenon. It's not just something that occurs in emerging markets. It also happens in places like Vancouver and London, across developed economies as well as developing ones. And as I mentioned before, they look after legitimate customers, but they also, unfortunately, seem to have interactions with the grey markets and underworld. And generally speaking, we see them with improper licensing. They may be licensed as money service businesses, but they won't be registered as crypto ones and may operate outside other anti-money laundering control frameworks. Fantastic. And I'm sure in some part due to the reporting that Spencer, Sheila, and Emma have done, have been some regulatory responses. I was heartened to see that in London, 8 sites were raided for operating illegally. 47 licenses were revoked in Canada, probably off the back of your investigations. And even in the last week or the last few days has been ATMs facing a nationwide ban, crypto ATMs facing a nationwide ban. And that's some fantastic impact. And really, I think that's very much in part to you guys shedding a light on this kind of stuff. So just to sort of look at how big of the problem is, I ran some numbers today using a popular aggregator site called Best Change. It says May 2024, the date's actually from this month. And what we notice is that there are lots and lots of these services in operation, not just in Moscow where they are most dense, but also across the world. 57 in London, 48 in New York. So centers where these businesses are probably operating almost certainly without any form of local licensing. I thought I'd run the experiment across the whole of the United States, and no particular surprise is that the services are very busy in very densely populated states inside the continent of the US. I also think we should talk about during the presentation today a bit about Iran, and talk about why Iran still matters, because we know that particularly in the investigations that Sheila and Emma did, Iran was like or Farsi speaking services were like a fairly big part of the investigation or things that you covered. I'll park there for a second, and I just want to get a bit of a thing is you know, what drew you to this story first? I know, Spencer, we spoke very early on, late last year, perhaps. Like, what initially drew you to this story in particular? Like, what got you excited or thinking that cash desk was something that might need covering?
Well, I'll step back a bit further and give the overview of kind of why ICIJ got interested in crypto to begin with. For over a decade now, our kind of core area of coverage has been money laundering and financial secrecy, stretching back to the Panama Papers. And we have just continued to see increasing numbers of kind of references to cryptocurrency in the financial documents that we're always combing through from offshore jurisdictions. So we're seeing shell companies increasingly settling transactions with each other in cryptocurrency, anonymous trusts doing the same. And so that was kind of the impetus for us to want to get a better understanding of what's going on in cryptocurrency in terms of illicit finance and the higher risk areas of the financial world. So once we started doing this, we kind of looked at the on ramps and off ramps between TradFi and crypto as really like some of the really key areas to focus on. Cash desks emerged from conversations with both law enforcement and experts like Nick yourself as this kind of frontier of this parallel banking system, of the ways that it touches traditional finance, the ways that legitimate actors and criminals can discreetly cash in and out of crypto. And, we were hearing this and then, looking at the previous coverage of it, and there was so little, there was almost nothing. So it was something we just, around this time last year, decided we just had to take on because it seemed very significant according to a lot of good sources. And the coverage of it just wasn't quite there, which was really fascinating for us.
I'd love to sort of like drill down a little bit there about, it was untouched for such a long period of time. Now, in that periods of cryptocurrencies kind of adoption or, its growth around, over time, we've had legislation passed, we've had lots of regulations appear and things like that. What do you think was the reasoning for this? Like, why did you get the impression that this hadn't been looked at in any sort of substantial sort of way? Had it been underestimated, or was it, something else?
I think I'm not really sure. I think you saw it pop up in indictments, beginning several years ago, these bulk cash services. And I think that at least in the English language media, there wasn't a big awareness that there, either wasn't an awareness or there wasn't really, there just hadn't been an opportunity to really take it on. It's complex reporting. If you're in the United States, it's very hard to report on these services here. I can go into that a little bit later, but it required to really understand how this ecosystem worked for me, required a lot of traveling, editors who were willing to kind of take a little bit of a risk, and a lot of even some financial resources, because we did our own test transactions, which are not cheap and again are not without risk in terms of losing a lot of money for the organization. For a reporter out there doing test transactions who's not familiar or has no previous experience using a unhosted wallet in crypto, for instance. So I think there were, yeah, so those are some of the kind of barriers to entry there that we dealt with early on and were really a pain to deal with, but we were glad that we did because we're very proud of the work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Sheila, Emma, like, same question. What attracted you to this kind of story? Like, I think as Spencer said, like for us, we did a similar kind of thing as a business. Like, I had a bit of trust given to me. Like, we think there's something there, but we're not quite sure, and we kind of had to dig a little bit further and take a risk. Like, what really attracted you guys to this story, and what what sort of like line did you take to say, hey, we really need to go and look into this? What was that conversation like?
I think for me at least, a big part of it was just that this didn't seem to be on anyone's radar in Canada. Um, we read through a whole bunch of regulator reports. We read through a whole bunch of cases. We couldn't find a single thing referencing that this type of entity even existed. And I think that showed us that there was a real story there, that there was an opportunity for us to potentially make an impact on the conversation around this type of thing. The other thing playing out in the background, of course, is that Canada right now is undergoing an evaluation from the Financial Action Task Force. So this is a moment when regulators are thinking about these issues. This is a moment when the public is kind of thinking about these issues. And so it just kind of seems like the right story at the right time.
Absolutely. And Canada too, as well, like it's got a bit of a checkered history, unfortunately, for it with money laundering, right? You've got the Toronto Dominion Bank, a bit of a scandal there. We talk about the Vancouver method of money laundering with casinos, which is fairly familiar to the compliance people in the audience. Like, I guess, like, also surprising to me was when we looked at Canada and when we were doing our research was just how many of the services were there that had no visibility, in documents, and that's really quite surprising. You said that there's not reports about them in, various court proceedings and things like that. I mean, I don't actually like. What did you think the reason for that was, or did you get a semblance of why that might have been the case?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing that I personally experienced will be the knowledge barrier. Because when I first started, I have almost near zero knowledge about crypto. Obviously, I've heard of it as the person next to me, but I don't think I had the skill sets or the knowledge to truly understand it. So I think that's probably part of the reason why you don't really see a lot of coverage on this, because you have to invest a lot of resources and time into like reporter training. Like for Emma and I, are very fortunate we have you. Like you basically helped us, and we learn from you and from the most basic, like how do you trade crypto transaction and flows and through blockchains and stuff like that, and how do you look at that, and what are the tools out there, and why this is important, why that part is important, what is the why this is a complex and difficult thing to trace, and all of that was something that you have to learn from the scratch. And for me, I had never, like, before the collaboration, I have never like even delved with crypto. Like I didn't really do any tradings. So I think you can imagine how difficult it is for someone to report on it, but they haven't really done with it. So, and through this process, I did some undercover. So I now kind of understood how to do like a basic level trading with crypto. So I think all of that takes a lot of time and takes a willingness from the newsroom, your editor, who can, support you in a way that, yes, you can spend some time on this. Oh, yes, it's probably going to cost some money, and you're probably not going to turn this around in 2 days or even a week. We just have to give you space to grow and learn. Then you can really do a truly in-depth reporting. I think that probably explained why there wasn't a lot of reporting, like in-depth reporting on crypto issues before.
That's a really interesting point as well. And I think it's actually a bit of an intersection of things. So people talk about cryptocurrency, and one of the big advantages of it is it's built on an open system, right? Blockchain. But if the people we see as sort of gatekeepers and guardians of that information are just the private companies, not journalists who can help that, I think it's really important that that kind of bridge gets crossed, because, from a compliance professionals perspective, we also need negative news. Like we need to know things that are wrong with businesses or wrong with a particular type of product or activity, so we can inform our risk assessment. So I think it's really important, that we can help support you in this kind of endeavor, so that you can also go and look at this stuff. So it's not just, us saying it, it's a more neutral party who isn't as connected to the industry as perhaps we are, to sort of say, hey, these are the things that you're finding, and we can help empower and do that. I think, like I love the fact that we've tried to help bridge that gap, and I really hope this leads to more reporting, because it helps the industry mature. And as we saw, like, action taking place is always, I think, a goal for you guys. Definitely, everyone wants to have, the clicks and the links, and everyone to read their story, but tangible action, taken against services is really a very rewarding thing, and it's good for us too. We like to see that, because it means that people are taking notice to the risks, and it helps, protect clients and the industry. I guess one of the questions I have then is, like, well, what did you find, like, most surprising during the research? I'll tell you about you, Spencer. Like, when you did this, I know in your piece in the Coin Laundry, you followed an investigator around a variety of places and sort of like shadowed him for it. What did you find most surprising about your interactions with these services? Like, what was the sort of standout moment when you thought, what the hell is this?
Yeah, there are a lot of moments like that. I'd highlight a few things. So first off, and maybe the one of the first cash desks I visited in Ukraine would be a good example of this. This is a cash desk that was located in a back room. You walk through this narrow deli, where it's just there are 1,000 delis like it in any major city. And you walk to a back room. It's labeled on the door as a currency exchange. It is this kind of dingy small room with a desk and maybe some filing cabinets. And we arranged this cash to crypto swap on Telegram. They said, sure, come on over. And first they put us on the kind of secret Telegram. They moved my Telegram chat from the normal Telegram to the what's called, I guess, a secret chat that's extra encrypted and self-destructs and stuff like that. And then did the transaction, $1,200 into crypto, and was, astonished at how easy this was. This if all you need is a self-custody wallet and a smartphone that can scan a QR code. Also, some bulk cash lying around, but this is really easy stuff. Obviously, if you're going to get into layering and some of the more nuanced areas of laundering the crypto, that might take a little bit of extra expertise. But so one of the kind of standout moments there was finishing that transaction in this very low-key back room of a deli, and then having gotten their cryptocurrency address from that transaction, analyzing it later and seeing that this address had moved millions of dollars, and it's probably even more significant than the sheer number was the average transaction size, which was over 10,000 US dollars per transaction, which is that's a big sum, especially in Ukraine, where in terms of that is more than the average national salary. And so that kind of underscored to me that at least this service was not dealing with regular users. This is just not the normal amount that people go and withdraw money from a bank or an ATM in physical cash. So there is something there. So that was really striking. And I'll say that the more transactions I did or that I observed at these cash desks in Poland, Ukraine, and Dubai, the more I saw that kind of very large transaction volume per transaction what was pretty normal. And once I got to Dubai, it was actually just kind of blew those Ukrainian numbers out of the water. There's so much money moving per transaction. So yeah, I'll stop there. But the just the sheer amount of money moving through these services, and the kind of per transaction averages were really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's also something that we found when we initially started doing this research. Was I remember very well, like the researchers were out in one country in Asia, and I remember them going into the premises and sending back some photographs, and it wasn't a particularly large room, and then looking on chain and seeing, $380 million in 9 months. What the hell is this going on? And I think I think we all kind of, for the audience as well, like until you see it, you can't really quite believe it. I think that's what I found, definitely. I don't know, Emma, did you have like a similar kind of like standout moment when you were working on the story with Sheila? I don't know if you guys have something similar.
Yeah, I mean, the amounts of money certainly like made our eyes open a bit wider. I think the other big thing was the brazenness, kind of on two fronts. Like the first would be just the physical storefronts. Sheila and I walked down Yonge Street in Toronto, for those who don't know, like a really big major thoroughfare, arguably one of the city's most iconic streets. And we just saw so many crypto to cash desks opening or operating in the wide open with like the crypto signage outside, um, with no license or with the wrong license, the wrong registration with our federal regulator. So that was a bit wild, just seeing like, hey, they're all right in the open, a short transit ride from FinTrack's downtown office. Um, and the other thing was how easy it was online to be able to tell. Like Sheila and I, thanks to the training from the ICIJ and the stuff that you taught us, Nick, we are able to do a little bit of crypto tracing, right? But once you get over the initial like learning curve, it's really not that hard. Um, and our question was if we're able to see transactions that are huge, that raise really big red flags, not just for us, but for people who actually know what they're doing, why isn't our regulator, why aren't our police seeing this as well?
Interesting question. Just to say, is it's not that easy. You just have great teachers, is what it is. I'm going to take all credit for this. Sheila, I remember we spoke before the webinar where you said that there was like a few times when you had this kind of like oh wow kind of moment. I don't know if you could elaborate on like your experiences. I remember there's one particular thing you were saying. It wasn't Yonge Street. There was somewhere else you remember you told me about.
Yeah, there's a mall in Toronto. So it's like a three-story mall, like very unassuming from the outside. The moment you walked in, the first basement floor will be a big, gigantic grocery store. But once you walk up, there's so many crypto shops inside the mall. Like everywhere you turn, everywhere you go, there are crypto shops with Persian and English language on the signage. They're out there, and we check. Like also, like Emma said, it's very easy to check what they actually do online on Instagram. Like almost like a lot of them all do crypto, and a lot of them are not really registered to do so. I think Emma and I had this very interesting experience when we're walking around the mall, just kind of get a feeling how many are there, and there are some of them just back to back, and they're very small, like every one of them like almost like a full stop, that kind of size. You walk around, they're all just busy with their business. So there are clients coming in and out with a counter. You can see from the door because it's not that big. And at one of the desk, like the business we're supposed to check out, it was we had this name and address on our list. So we went to the address inside the mall, and we found this little store was closed, and there's a signage, like a very small, like a paper on the closed door. So we got really close to it, tried to read what's on there. But before we could finish reading, and there's a strange guy just came up to us and started talking like in a really weird way and sending a really weird vibe to us, because before we were kind of, when we were doing interviews with other experts, we were kind of given a heads up, just be careful with our personal safety. You don't want to walk away with a target on your back. So we're mindful of that. But the moment the guy showed up and started like smiling on us in a very weird way, we just kind of got really picked up on a really weird kind of vibe. So we didn't really engage, we didn't really say much, but he appeared to be quite interested in what we are doing there. So he asked, what are you guys doing? Basically, he wasn't even working at the store. He's probably walked up from another place all the way to us. And we didn't really respond much, and we walked away. So that was one very interesting interaction with him. That kind of because the heads up we had received before going on this field trip, kind of put them together. I feel like maybe that's something. Maybe someone is watching, or someone just being really careful. The other thing is, there are multiple clusters crypto shops that we found along Yonge Street in Toronto. One of the clusters we found is this small plaza on Yonge Street. We're driving by, and we saw security guards posted just outside. And then almost every storefront, the crypto shops, have security cameras. So it's just very heavily guarded place. And even if you walk around in that area without thinking about doing a story, that is still like quite a place that will stand out to you. That is not like your regular cafe or, a bakery shop. It's just very different. So I think those are the moments we were like, wow, what is going on? We're like, we knew that there's a story there, but we didn't know it was so obvious and it's just so extremely weird.
Yeah, it's really fascinating too. Like, and I think like the safety aspect is obviously something that we don't take for granted. I think this like leads me to like another sort of like questioning, and maybe just sort of stay with you, Sheila, is like, who's been using these services? And so you mentioned that in Yonge Street, like a lot of it was used by like Persian speakers, so Iranian diasporas and so on and so forth. And there is a lot of discussion around Iran at the moment due to current events. Bear in mind we're nearly at 100 days. Not consecutive, but without internet in Iran, and lots of discussions about, the elites fleeing the country, the potential for the regime to collapse, the potential for regime figures to have their families overseas and things like that. Like, who do you think is using these services, and why do you think they use them and not, a normal bank transaction method?
I mean, from talking to people in the community in Toronto, what we understand is that there are a ton of normal people who use these services to try to get money to family at home, which is increasingly difficult with like the ever shifting landscape of sanctions that make it really hard to bank with Iran. In Canada, our banks have no relationship with financial institutions in Iran, so there's really no way to do it through traditional means. At the same time, what we were able to see when we took a closer look at some of the wallets that were being used by some of these storefronts is that some people who might be getting their money from different places might have been using them as well. What we found was that some of the transactions raised red flags for experts, appearing to be showing alleged links to Iran-backed terror groups, for example. So the concern there, I guess, is that there's a real legitimate need here in the diaspora community, and that some bad actors may be attempting to leverage that for their own purposes.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really interesting dynamic too. And again, I think it sort of speaks to, the use of this system might not necessarily all be bad. Although, Spencer, I think your guy operating in the back of a sandwich shop, in Kiev or wherever it might have been in Ukraine, processing millions of dollars, may have a slightly different story, or maybe we want to have a look more closely at that sort of thing. But I do think there is a legitimate thing. But is that enough for you guys? Like, do you think that, the argument that this is the only way that people can find ways to interact with the financial systems, to send money back to family because of restrictions placed upon them, either technical or legislative, is this a compelling enough case for these services to operate as they are? I don't know, Spencer, how would you feel about that?
The presence of good uses of these services. I mean, there's no doubt that they can be used for remittances and things like that. I think the kind of question is, if you're going to use them for these legitimate services, could they be licensed properly? Could they do KYC in a meaningful fashion? then there's the question of their basic traceability. Could they, and this is getting kind of into very theoretical territory, but could they provide their crypto addresses to regulators or blockchain analytics firms so that someone could know what they're up to? There's I don't doubt, there's certainly no doubt that there's legitimate uses for them, but the ways that they're operating in the shadows, and not doing KYC and often not having proper registration, none of that is really, if they were to come out of the shadows, properly register, operate in less secretive fashions, the legitimate stuff could probably take place in a better way at these places.
Yeah.
If I can add on to Spencer's great point, it's perfectly legal to run this type of business in Canada if you follow some really not that rigorous steps. Sheila and I looked at what it would take for us to register our very own crypto to cash desk. And I think we actually could have done it if we wanted to, Sheila. With it's that's like one aspect of it that has actually been really critiqued here is that some argue it should be much more difficult to open up this type of business. You should be subject to more scrutiny. So the question that a lot of experts asked us was if it's really not that hard to have a legal regulated version of this business, what's the point in not doing it? And that's where we get into like some scarier questions, right? About why people would want to be away from the scrutiny of the regulator.
Yeah, I think this is a really important point, and I think we have worked really hard. And it's a question that comes back to me a lot about financial inclusion. I think we've talked about it before, which is like compliance isn't easy and it's not cheap, but it's very important because everybody loses money laundering, right? That's money that doesn't come back to your economy that could be paid for, things we all like teachers and schools and hospitals and roads and, less tax and all those good sort of things. And these are the kind of things we try to catch with, anti-money laundering control measures. And I do think it's hard to separate, ignorance, as in people who don't know what they're doing, from negligent people, as you were describing, who are deliberately avoiding simple registrational rules. And it also reminds me of an anecdote we had when our researchers were in one place where they went into the shop and they said for any transaction below a threshold, I think it was $5,000, they said any transaction below $5,000, they needed to provide identity documents, but over that, they didn't care, which was inverse compliance, but okay, up to them and do it. I want to move a different track and let's move away from cashless specifically, because I think there's also another big point, and it's very rare that us as a commercial company will speak to journalists like in this kind of public forum. But there's a really big thing that I want to take and pass on to our audience here, and that's telling stories about crypto. Because ultimately, our audience here aren't necessarily going to be all journalists. I think in the first poll that we saw, like most of them are from a compliance background and so on and so forth. And they're interested in this. I'm speaking on behalf of everybody here. They're interested because of the risk they face to them. But another big thing that we have to do as compliance officers or investigators is impart our stories, like telling people what we've found and why it's important and why it matters. And, you've all sort of like fairly not wrote lots of crypto stories before this, I can imagine. Like, what did you find the best way to explain and tell the audience about your story? Like, what was the ways that you did that? Because they're well written and like they're easy to understand for a non-technical audience. But what did you find was useful in telling these sort of narratives and made them compelling?
Obviously we want writing crypto stories is a challenge because you're both explaining. You need to write to a wide audience that doesn't know the first thing about cryptocurrency. So almost every story needs to teach the people reading it who have never heard of crypto what crypto is, while also moving along to the actual investigative findings of the story. That's a difficult writing burden, and it adds a lot of editing, and it's just a tough needle to thread, but obviously many people do it. So there's that added burden there. For us, it's very important to humanize the story without, and this is at this point probably cliche to many people, but it does continue to be true across our reporting. And especially with abstract things on the more abstract level, like money laundering and stuff like that. If you don't tie it to the real world of human consequences, it is really hard for it to resonate with people. So one of the things we did, and this was not so much present in our cash desk reporting, but was to talk to victims of cryptocurrency scams, specifically to the more sophisticated people who had fallen victim to the more kind of sophisticated pig butchering type of scams. Hear their stories and integrate those into our reporting to show the human cost of compliance lapses. And it's kind of a cyclical thing. The more actual humans you talk to who have suffered consequences, the more you understand the system. Crypto victims of crypto scams are incredible sources of information about how the scams work and even how the money laundering works, because they get coached by the scammers on how to convert their fiat life savings to crypto. They have the addresses, the cryptocurrency addresses the scammers use to take their money. So, humanizing stories, it not only helps from a storytelling standpoint, but also just from a basic reporting and fact checking standpoint, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also to speak on victims too is, and I think it's something that everyone should do, is understand why we do what we do, right? It's really important to reinforce in our minds why we do the work that we do, from a defending perspective. And I find that's why, particularly the stories about victims of fraud, are very, very hard to read, because you do hear some very, very tragic circumstances of people who thought they were getting opportunity and had it snatched away from them in a horrible way. And that really helps to enrich it. Emma, Sheila, I think you also talked about the human side, and I think that's also an undercurrent of a lot of things that we try to do at Crystal as a technology provider. Is we try to look at the human dynamic of cryptocurrency. Like, these cash desks are very human things. How did you guys find telling the story? Like, what helped you to send your message?
It's very important to know that the stories like this are technical, and then it's almost like talking about like a topic in the niche market, but the story has broader public interest implications. So we want to make sure the messaging will not just be delivered to people who are interested in crypto, who have done with crypto, but also people who probably has never done it, doesn't know anything about it, but how do we make them care as well? So it's all about zooming in and zooming out. So zooming in into the technical fine details and explain everything, that how it happened, the blockchain chasing. But then you zoom out from a bigger picture perspective. Why does matter to you? Who, for example, you have never done crypto, doesn't know anything about it. You probably think, I don't care about this. But then how do we deliver this reporting to you as well as a reader? You still care about it. So, for example, the most recent story we did, the most recent investigation we did about this unregistered crypto shops along Yonge Street, the component in the public interest sphere will be, the alleged links to terrorism finance, money laundering, and also the lack of regulatory actions, and then maybe the gaps in our regulatory efforts at the federal level. And this impacts everyone. This doesn't mean like, oh, I don't do crypto, doesn't have anything to do. No, it has everything to do with you as a person who lives in Canada. So I think that's the zooming out part, and the zooming in part will be where we're talking about how this happened, what does matter to people who are in the crypto community. So in this way, we capture both ends. So this is the story, like kind of like this unregistered crypto shop story, and then we have the crypto scam stories, and those stories. I find them most impactful when we can find, like Spencer said, human voices, which is challenging because I think the biggest challenge will be like they do understand this is in public interest. If I tell my story to the public, then I probably will help others. They wouldn't follow. They wouldn't fall, wouldn't become victims just like me. So I save other people's money and save other people's time. They wouldn't have to go through. They all understand. Every single person we talk to, they all understand that. But it's difficult for them to kind of really put their face and name in the publication, because there's an embarrassment. That element is so strong across board. Every victim was like, I don't, I have a legitimate job, and then, I'm like a professional. I don't want to put my name and face out there. People are gonna laugh about it. So I think that's a really big challenge for us to kind of, it's kind of almost too much to lay on one person, just one individual shoulder, to tell you, this is story is so important, because once you tell it, and people, gonna create a better society, people will be safer in their investment, they wouldn't fall into the same schemes. But at the same time, you have a real individual's like life and career and everything at stake. Once they speak out, maybe they'll change their life. So we'll have to like maybe just become very transparent with them about the potential implications, but then also let's balance. This is, the pros and cons for you, but also your potential contribution to society. Wherever they land, that would be, kind of depends on individuals. Some of them really just pull through the like, yeah, I want to talk about this story. I just want to be able to prevent other people from falling into the same traps. But there are other people like, no, the stakes too high for me. I'm like a real professional and well known in my community. I can't put my face out there. It's okay. Well, we have to respect their decision. So that's kind of it took quite a bit of time for us to bond with them, so that they trust us that we can deliver a quality accurate reporting on this matter. But at the same time, they also have to consider their personal implications. So it's definitely been a challenge and struggle.
I think also that return to agency is really important. Like, it's definitely something that we say, and again, majority of the audience here are people who are professionals in the space who are trying to like secure their institution with else. But I guess the key narrative here is that like by taking those reports, by taking that time, by listening to your person who's been a victim of fraud, by taking a statement from them and passing on to law enforcement, giving them some power back, it's very, very important for them, as well as protecting their identity. They may not be willing to share too much or who they are, but they are very happy to push that information to you to sort of help someone else. And I think that's a really powerful sort of dynamic, and it's not just exclusive to media, right? Like we on the the professional defenders side also need to take that on board and make sure that we are treating them with respect, but also giving them the opportunity to sort of like take control back away from the people who've hurt them, and continue to do so. Emma, I'll give you a last chance. I'm conscious we're running out of time. I'm sure we could speak for a lot longer than what we've had today. How did you tell a good story with crypto? Like, what was the way to do it?
I think that the technical side is really hard. And I know, like, I think everybody who touches on crypto in their job struggles with how to communicate about it to the rest of the world and to people who don't understand it. I think what Sheila and I ended up doing a lot was just getting a lot of feedback from people around us who were sworn to secrecy through their employment with us at the same newspaper. So we spent a lot of time talking to coworkers saying, hey, does this make sense? Like, if I explain it this way, do you understand what I'm saying? And then, we have to take what we're doing, dumb it down a little bit so that it's like understandable to the layperson, and then go back to the experts like you and say, hey, is this way of explaining it oversimplified? Did we actually make this incorrect by trying to make it a little more easy to understand? And just going through that process of trying to find the right balance. I think it helped us in some way that our editors are also not huge crypto guys, because they were learning as we were. And they were able to say, well, that doesn't quite make sense to the average person, or like that kind of would need a little bit more explaining from me. So that part was good. Having a range of experiences and backgrounds, read the relevant parts of it for sure.
That's a really, really good piece of advice as well. It's difficult sometimes for some compliance functions because they can't always share confidential material. But if the narrative, everybody understands it, and maybe you've got somebody who's in a related and appropriately cleared part of the business to sort of review it and make sure it makes sense, I think that's a really, really sensible bit of advice. We've got the final poll just come up, if we can have that. And then I also just want to put like a final thing out today. Is like kind of the one part is we need to address these exchanges. And I know this is where we tend to get like the most friction between media and the crypto businesses, is like their interactions with exchanges. I just like if there's some advice for exchanges on, if you have a question for them, like what they can do to help you, how they can ensure that, if they do get a press inquiry about something, like what sort of things would you hope that they can help provide you, or help you out with your stories? I don't know, Spencer, I know you have a lot of interaction with exchanges for comment. How have you found the interaction, and how could that be improved?
Talking to us is the first step toward good communication. In a lot of cases, the kind of standard response to for any financial institution, and this goes for banks and Wall Street firms and cryptocurrency exchanges, they often just either provide they either don't respond at all or provide very bare bones statements, or maybe something a little longer than what you'd consider a bare bones statement, but that is a lot of kind of information that's not directly answering any questions. And then some exchanges, and one in particular, really did, and this is true with any big story we do. Sometimes there is a company or two companies, if we're reaching out to a bunch of companies, that really come forward and say, hey, we're going to actually engage in a dialogue with you. And that can be really helpful. And I think it's something a lot of companies are scared to do. They're scared they'll say too much and end up hurting their case or what have you. They'll lose control of the narrative. I generally think that when those companies engage, it is better for everyone. It's better for the industry. It's better for the journalists, because the journalists understand what's going on in a greater way. So, that's always my wish. I kind of like see ICIJ as almost like partners of financial institutions. Like, obviously they never like to hear that we're finding dirty money or money linked to crimes in their systems, but like we're kind of there to help improve things, just like a compliance department is, except we're very public about it. And so some companies really will treat us like that, and I will say that a number of people at exchanges thanked us on background for what we were doing. It was, look, this is what we don't love to get these queries, but it's really important work. We got quite a number of those. But then some take a more adversarial approach, and are I think ultimately just don't pass along in that stance, don't pass along enough information to help themselves or help us.
Yeah, I think it's like sunlight is always a very good detergent. And I also think like it's a really interesting thing you're saying, and I think, everyone in the audience here who works in those teams will understand, is we all rely heavily on negative news for screening stuff. On-chain activity is part of it. What they provide us at KYC and onboarding is another part of it. But it is stories like the coin laundry, like the discussions about Yonge Street in Canada, like all the other things that are contributed, the Panama Papers even, that will prompt reviews of high-risk clients and ultimately benefit the institution, like protect you from fines, raise questions about clients and their integrity, what their business activities are. It really is an opportunity to that. And I think it's another interesting thing you said too there, Spencer, which was like, consider the journalists almost as like an extension of your compliance team. Like, they're not going to do as you tell them to. Like, they're not going to go and find, just the amount of data you want them to, but they are going to find the skeletons which could damage your business and penalty and that sort of stuff. And I think that's a much more, mature way of looking at it. Emma, Sheila, how was your interaction with exchanges? I know you contacted a couple in your story, and the interactions seemed quite defensive. How about other exchanges? How were they?
I'm struggling to think of one that, well, maybe there was one that went well actually, where a company was helpful and did their best to actually explain things from their perspective, and that was like tremendously useful to the reporting. I think in a big way, like what I would really emphasize, and that I hope companies understand, is it's not that reporters are out to get you, that's not the point. We care about shining a light on issues, and we also want to make sure that we are fair about it. We want to make sure that we are giving justice to your perspective and your side. We know that there are things that we don't know that only you could tell us, and we want to know them so that we can write a fair, balanced story. And I think what's frustrating sometimes on our end is if companies decide they don't want to participate or decide that they don't want to answer questions, and then after the fact feel that something wasn't presented fairly, and we can't publish or act on information we don't know. So I just always encourage people that like we're not your enemy. We do want to know what you have to say. We do really, really, really want your perspective. It's genuine, and I think it makes for a fairer, better, more comprehensive story when companies do participate.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really good thing. I think this thing, considering the time, we've got one question. I think it's probably an important one to answer. I'll read it out. When a journalist finds suspicious behavior at a business, does the journalist submit the relevant data to law enforcement or regulators, or do the law enforcement or regulators find out in publication as a matter of course? I know this is always difficult because you don't want to disrupt your story, and I'm sure it's a big balancing act. Like, what sort of things go into making that decision? And again, it'd be great to hear like the journalist perspective on this, because I'm sure there are considerations what we think is happening, but how does it work on the press's side for this?
I want to hear Spencer's perspective on it for sure. I think for Sheila and I, if I may be daring enough to speak for both of us, our newsroom is pretty strong on the point that we are not an arm of regulators or law enforcement. We do not work for them. We do not share our information with them. We're not tipsters. Uh, we do sometimes have to share information so that the agency can comment on it. So we'll summarize our findings or give them relevant portions of our findings so that they can comment on it and have a fair perspective to weigh in. Um, and that's like that difference isn't always apparent to people, but that's what our line is. We're not cooperating with authorities or we're not submitting the data to law enforcement, but we do have to ask for their perspective, and sometimes they need the context to be able to do that, if that makes sense.
Very clear, yeah.
Yeah, same with us. I we did share quite a bit with law enforcement before publication, but that was because I was dying to know whether they had certain crypto addresses, and whether those were labeled in their systems and stuff like that. But really, all of the reporting findings that we share with law enforcement is just in the reporting process. Unless there's imminent threat to bodily harm or something like that, we don't share with law enforcement outside of reporting purposes.
No, and I think that's a sort of a fair response too, because I guess if you've identified a gap, in something that's going wrong, is it corruption? Is it systemic? Are there bigger organization issues other than they didn't spot something? Which again, you don't want to compromise your sources too potentially, right, by informing them of particular things. So I can see that. So that brings us to an end, I suppose. We've spoken for an hour, and I really have appreciated these conversations, and I really enjoyed working with you guys on those stories. Truly, I think it's nice to see impact, and I really hope that it continues. And I hope that the comments that you guys have made have added to our audience's understanding of how to tell better stories about crypto. Even if you aren't a journalist, you still have to tell stories to your boss, to your regulator, to your government, whoever it might be. It's really an important thing to be able to do, is to communicate, as well as also understand the risk underneath it, which we see with cash desks repeatedly. I'll close it out there. Does anyone else have any final thoughts? Anything they want to share at all? Emma, Sheila, Spencer?
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody wants to chat crypto or has any stories, any story tips that they want to provide, Or if they want to just kind of make themselves available, if they have crypto tracing expertise, we're always looking for tracers to help, either using their name or on background. Please get in touch with me, and also with Emma and Sheila. We're a great team and we love news sources. So my signal is spencerwoodman.07. That's my username, and you can find all of my contacts and stuff online. So yeah, and thanks so much to Nick and the Crystal team for all of their awesome work and for arranging this today.
Well, unless there's any other remarks, thank you very much for your time this morning, this afternoon. I'm not sure where everyone is, evening, night. It's been an absolute blast, and really thank you so much for bringing back the human dynamic to the technology. I think, as we said in the discussion about how to tell a good story, it is a technical product, but it is used by humans, and it's really important that we can properly tell stories around it. Thank you all so much, and thank you everybody for being here. Goodbye from us. Thanks.